Hey everybody, welcome back to Living in St. Pete. In today's video, we are going to give you an unfiltered, realistic view of things that you should know before you consider moving to the Sunshine City. And I've lived here for years. I moved to St. Pete from Gainesville, but I've lived all around the state of Florida. I've traveled many places. I love St. Pete, but as someone who's helped hundreds of people buy and sell homes in St. Petersburg, I feel like I've got a pretty good idea of the things that people love and don't love, and some of the things that people don't really consider when they're moving here from out of the area. So definitely stay tuned for this. Make sure number 4 isn't going to bother you too much. And without further ado, let's get into it. These are 7 things you need to know before you move to St. Petersburg. One is that St. Petersburg is like a quilt. And by that I mean, we do kind of have, St. Pete is St. Pete, but St. Pete is just kind of the eastern part of this peninsula that I think when people think of St. Pete, when they're coming here from Oregon or New York or something, they think St. Pete, they think our peninsula, but it's St. Pete, it's Clearwater, and it's a lot of cities in the middle. And so that kind of creates this patchwork effect where, one cluster of homes is very different than another cluster that might only be half a mile away. And that's true not just for the peninsula, but for even just the proper city limits of St. Pete as well. For instance, the Old Northeast has all of these gorgeous craftsman bungalows. They're close to parks. They go really hard when it comes to the holidays. Their Halloween celebrations are famous here locally. They shut down the streets. It's a whole big ordeal. But it's a completely different vibe than just crossing the street a little bit and going to Crescent Lake Park and the homes around there. And so there's just a lot of different vibes here. I like to warn people about this because if you're planning a trip to come into town and you think you're going to see St. Pete or get an idea of what it's like to live in St. Pete in just a day or two, it may not be realistic. Now, of course, if that's the plan, just reach out to us at the number below. Me or a member of my team are happy to kind of point you in the direction of maybe what you should focus on based off of what you're looking for. But overall, St. Pete is kind of this patchwork of different communities, different vibes, in different neighborhoods. So something to be aware of, definitely keep an eye on that. Number 2 is we're going to talk about affordability. And St. Pete is an amazing place to live. As a result of that, a lot of people want to live here. So our real estate prices have gone up in the last few years, just like everywhere else. But especially in our downtown St. Pete area, there are a lot of new developments, but these new developments are luxury condos, things like 400 Central, things like Art House or Reflections. There's a couple of new projects planned. There's one in particular called at the Thomason Center that is focusing on more kind of middle class. They've capped purchasers' incomes at 110% of the area median income. That'll be a couple hundred units. So there are definitely pushes for more affordable housing, but increasingly, if you want to be more centralized, closer to downtown or along 4th Street North, you're going to need to pay a pretty price for that parcel. Of course, there's more affordable options. My team and I are happy to guide you through that. But if you go a little bit more centered into the peninsula, maybe 10 to 15 minutes away from downtown, you start getting a lot more affordable. Of course, there's less expensive condos if you don't want to be in a luxury high rise. There are definitely options. But if you want something new and centrally located, you're looking at 7 figures easily. Now, our median as a whole is somewhere in the low 4s. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind that St. Pete, being as desirable as it is going to continue to attract people, and that's probably going to continue to put upward pressure on our pricing. Number 3 is be aware of insurance. There are definitely some insurance considerations that exist here that don't exist in other states. Namely, things like flood insurance. Certain areas of our peninsula are in lower lying areas that do require flood insurance if you're going to get a loan. And that, of course, is going to mean that your annual premiums are more expensive and should be factored in when you're considering a monthly budget. Now, thankfully, a very significant portion of our entire peninsula, also the city of St. Pete, is not in a flood zone, does not require flood insurance, and did not flood during the last storms. But of course, if you're looking for a waterfront property in Northeast St. Pete, for instance, around Shore Acres, Snell Isle area, you're going to need flood insurance. If you want to be right on the beach in Clearwater, you're going to need flood insurance. If you're in one of the luxury high rises in downtown St. Pete, those are all flood zone X, no flood insurance required. And if it was, it'd be in your association dues. Things like the historic Old Northeast or Crescent Lake, also mostly not in flood zones. So just things to consider. Some of it's less intuitive than you may expect. Sometimes you just look at proximity to the water and go, oh, it must be in a flood zone, and it's actually not due to elevation. So just something to be aware of. If you want more resources for that, just reach out. We'll send you a couple links that you can, for free, just kind of pop on and look at things, or just shoot us an address and we'll look it up for you. But yeah, definitely a consideration that can make a pretty big difference on what your monthly carrying costs are. On top of that, there's additional considerations. Insurance has gotten a little easier in the last couple of years, but for a minute there, insurers were getting pretty tight, and some of those rules have carried over. So you do need a certain amount of useful life left on your roof. You need certain upgrades and things that have happened to your AC, your electric, and your plumbing. And since a lot of the homes here in this peninsula are older homes that have been renovated over time, sometimes you'll find that, oh, everything looks great, it's cosmetically beautiful, the roof's new, but they didn't replace this one section of wiring in the attic or something like that. So it's important that if you're thinking about moving here, you're working with an agent who understands those things, can point you in the right direction for inspectors, and kind of handle that negotiation to get those things addressed, because it is something you'd like to address pre-closing and not have to carry with that kind of ridiculous insurance premium. All right, number 4 is the heat. And St. Pete is called the Sunshine City. We have the Guinness World Record for the most consecutive days of sunshine. And with that, in the summer comes heat. Now, right now it's March. It's like 65 to 72 today, sunny blue skies. That's amazing. But, you know, June, July, August, it gets a little hot, okay? Now, obviously, there's AC, there's the beaches, you know, there's ways to insulate yourself against it. But if you're someone who really, really doesn't do well in heat or tropical environments, St. Pete might not be the city for you, at least not for the summer months. We have a lot of people who snowbird here, if that's a budget option for you. But if you're planning on living here full time, plan for those few months to crank up that AC. That power bill is going to go up a little bit. And unless you're in the water or in the shade, you're not going to want to be spending too much time outside. That's just a reality of the situation. I've grown up in Florida my entire life. I was raised in Odessa. I've lived all across the state. It's just one of the things that comes with being in the Sunshine City of the Sunshine State, but definitely something you need to be aware of, and that you do not want to be caught off guard on when you move here and it's 99 degrees and 40% humidity in August or something like that. I don't know. Asterisk on the numbers, but you get the impression. Number 5 is just that the city's changing. There have been so many changes to St. Pete in just the last 5 to 10 years that someone who popped in 2018, who popped into the same area today, might not recognize it, especially if you look at just the skyline of downtown St. Pete. We talked briefly about 400 Central, which we can see right from our office window here. That's the current tallest building in St. Petersburg, but there's plans for a Waldorf Astoria building that will be slightly taller. Over here on Mirror Lake, there's a lot of planned developments. Our next video is actually going to cover some of those new condo developments. There's some good luxury housing options, but there's also some affordable options that are being subsidized by the city. Definitely subscribe and stay tuned for that one if that kind of stuff interests you. But a lot of developments happening at Mirror Lake, a lot of developments have happened and are continuing to happen in downtown proper. So it's definitely a bright 5 to 10 years, but if you're someone who just doesn't want any development, wants to keep kind of like a quaint coastal city, I'd recommend maybe moving outside of St. Pete slightly and considering a little bit north of us in this gorgeous town called Dunedin. And Dunedin just has these extremely calm coastal vibes, beautiful biking paths. It's a lot stiller, and it's only about 30 minutes from downtown St. Pete proper. You're still close to the Clearwater beaches. You're still close to a major airport. Or another consideration for you could be Gulfport, which is a little bit more of an artsy sub-city in our peninsula. So there's definitely options. Reach out to us. We'll guide you through it. But if you want to be in St. Pete proper, downtown St. Pete proper, expect development. That's what's going on. That's kind of the name of the game right now. Number 6 is kind of about tourism, but not about the tourists themselves. I know some people talk about this. I actually haven't really seen too big of a difference in my lifestyle based off of kind of the surging and desurging, if that's a word, population from the tourists. What I will say relating to tourism that I want to kind of warn you about is to just be wary of the things that are, not only for tourists, but exist because of the tourists. And so a good example of that is I love our pier. And I love Beach Drive, which is the road just next to the pier that we have these amazing museums on. One of my favorite museums here locally is the Museum of Fine Arts. And then there's also a lot of restaurants along Beach Drive. And they're nice restaurants, don't get me wrong. And some of them I definitely would recommend and I would go to, and I do go to regularly. But Beach Drive, for the most part, is not where, in my opinion, you're going to find the best food in the city, nor the best value. A lot of those restaurants get away with charging way too much for a pasta, in my opinion, because the tourists will come and it's right on, it's literally Beach Drive, it's right by the pier, and so they pay $35 for a pasta. not knowing that you could go 2 blocks up, you could walk from the pier 2 blocks up and get a much better pasta for much less money. So just be aware, definitely do all those things once, but as you get kind of routes established, ask the locals, ask us. We'll give you some really good recommendations. And because I was talking about pasta and I mentioned Gulfport earlier, probably the best Italian place in our peninsula is Pia's in Gulfport. I will hang my hat on that recommendation. Homemade pasta, homemade sauces, amazing. A little bit of a tangent, but yeah, so just be aware of the tourist traps, basically. And the 7th and last thing to know before you move to St. Pete is that St. Pete is truly amazing. I touched on this a couple times already, but I've lived all over this state. We really do have one of the top brokerages here. I've got a team of 6 agents. We've helped hundreds of people buy and sell homes in St. Pete. I know this city. I know people who come and leave this city and the reasons for it. And yeah, people love it here. I really only ever see people leaving because they have to, families or jobs or something. And I've never found a place that I've loved more than living in St. Petersburg. There's just so much. There's all this free, abundant natural resources that you can tap into, from gorgeous parks, amazing museums with free library passes. You can obviously go to the beaches. You have access to world-class beaches, like constantly ranked #1 on lists, always 10 minutes from you. No matter where you are in this peninsula, you're like 10 minutes from a world-class beach. You have amazing restaurants. You've got all this arts and culture. You've got all this development, but without it feeling too stuffy and buttoned up in the way kind of Tampa feels a little buttoned up and industrial. For me, it's just a little like a little too much. St. Pete is way more relaxed, way more artsy. Feels way more luxurious to me. The colors seem brighter. The music is softer, and the air smells sweeter. I swear to God, that's how I feel. So definitely something you should check out. My team and I would love to help you. If you have any questions at all, just reach out to us below, and we are happy to provide any guidance you might need. Make sure you like the video, comment other topics you'd like us to cover in the future, and subscribe so you can see our next video on these condo developments that are happening. So without further ado, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.